Welcome to the Florida Citizens Alliance podcast with your hosts, Rick Stevens and Keith Flaw.
Welcome back to the Florida Citizens Alliance podcast. We're really pleased to have you join us again. We always try to provide information that will help you and your students have the best education, let you know what we're working on towards providing solutions for that education, and generally keep you informed on the education landscape in Florida and some of the key things that are happening. I'm your host, Pastor Rick Stevens. Usually we're joined by Keith Flaw as well, but Keith is not available today. But I am really pleased to welcome to the podcast State Representative Bob Rommel. Welcome, Bob. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Pastor Rick, and looking forward to a great conversation on the Constitution, and particularly one portion of it that is a big concern to you.
That's really a key thing that you're bringing to all of our attention. And I don't know if people are aware of that, but they should be aware that there's been a lot of conversation in the nation about the Electoral College and what that means and whether we should have it and all of those kinds of things. So you've introduced in the Florida House a resolution relative to the Electoral College. Maybe you could explain what you're doing and maybe why it matters.
Great. It's House Resolution 323, and it's regarding the Electoral College that's in the Constitution. And I want to give you a little bit of feedback first. I think our nation is such an incredible nation because our founding fathers, they thought of almost everything. They thought of situations like this that's coming up now as we hear the crazy left talking about why we should have the popular vote and do away with the Electoral College. To me, it's amazing that this conversation is even happening. And I guess it's because, in the last now 19 years, we've actually had two presidents that have been elected that actually lost the popular vote. But people say that we're a democracy, but we're really a republic. And, each state needs to be equally represented. Right in front of me right now, I actually have a geographical map of the United States. And if they want to even go to a smaller, something that happened just recently, the Kentucky governor's race where Bevins lost. But if you look at the map, they have it shaded in blue or red mostly. 90% of our nation is red. It's truly amazing, except for California, which is its own problem. Most of the nation has conservative values. Most of the nation believe in God. Most of the nation believes in the 27 amendments in our Constitution. All of the elected officials in America swear to uphold the Constitution, yet we have those same people that are trying to erode the Constitution.
It's kind of hard to believe that would actually be happening. I agree with you. You would expect, and most of us would expect, that people who do take the oath of office to uphold the Constitution would actually live up to that. But that's obviously not happening in some states. And you mentioned in your resolution that that people should live up to their oath of office. Is it wrong to assume that everyone will? Have you seen that up close and personal?
2 years ago, I brought a bill to restore free speech on our college campuses. We see it all the time now that legislators across the nation believe that we should restrict speech because, you know what? Something is hateful. We shouldn't allow somebody to speak it. College presidents across the nation have restricted usually conservative speech to certain areas, usually around the corner, behind the dumpster. You have to hop 17 fences to get there. So if you're a group of students that want to have a club, you have no place to speak. When I filed the bill, maybe I was naive, but I said, how could anybody in the Florida House or Senate oppose free speech? It's the First Amendment in the Constitution. And our founding fathers knew that if government had the right to restrict speech, well, they wouldn't have to worry about the Second Amendment or anything else, because if you can't speak, government has all the power. We see it across the world in countries in South America or China, Middle East, where individuals really don't have the right to speak. But in that bill, unfortunately, it became a partisan attack on the freedoms that I believe God gave us. And, we did get the bill passed. We got it signed into law. The governor signed it. And actually now President Trump is taking some of the language from my bill and making sure that we have those same protections in the nation. But that's the First Amendment. And we still see it today that some of these disruptors, and I believe it's okay to be a disruptor in society. It's okay to engage in controversial debate. It's okay to oppose things that I do as a legislator. But those same individuals that want those freedoms are the same individuals saying, no, 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 but we have to limit speech in certain areas. And to me, it's either you're for freedom or you're not.
Well, I think that's right. It's curious that you mentioned some of those kind of things, because I was doing a little reading on this idea of the national popular vote and that should control the election for president. And it sounds like they're trying to frame this in a way that it gives everybody's vote the same importance, gives everybody the equal opportunity. But it looks like the effect of that is just the opposite, that it actually diminishes the votes of individual states and the ability for a state to speak up in its own language and for its own well-being. Does that make sense to you? Is that the way you read some of that?
Well, you're talking about the folks that are pushing for the popular vote, and I know what they're doing. And in theory, what they're doing, first of all, is wrong, because our founding fathers wanted to make sure that North Dakota, South Dakota had the same power to help elect a president than does New York or Virginia or Florida or Texas. Because if not, if you look at, again, you go back and look at that map, you look at that map where all those large urban cities, the turnout, and unfortunately for us, it seems to be high Democrat turnout, low Republican turnout, high Democrat registration, lower Republican registration. And a lot of the policies that those large cities are pushing is they're popular there because they keep promising citizens something that, we can't deliver. And we look at some of the major problems across America, whether it's drug abuse, violent crime, the need for government to help them because some reason they can't help themselves. It happens around all of those large urban cities that have very high taxes, poor quality of life, and I don't know, maybe that's what they want throughout the nation, the same policies that's destroying some of our most beautiful cities to destroy all of our nation. And so that North Dakota won't matter, so that South Dakota won't matter, Idaho won't matter. But our founding fathers knew that could happen. They knew that could happen. And if it did happen, first of all, it won't happen on my watch if I have anything to do with it. But if it did happen, you know what would happen? Republicans would just go campaign in those large cities for president. They wouldn't even pay attention to the smaller cities. They would go to the 10 largest cities where most of the people live, and then they would go campaign there. And you know what? In the end, it would be awful for our country.
Well, I think that's exactly right. What sounds like an argument for fairness becomes ultimately unfair because certain areas would be neglected and ignored. And in a sense, that's going to happen anyway because it's the strategy of an election. That happens everywhere. But if we took away the Electoral College, it would put it into the system and virtually require candidates to do that. That would certainly leave out the smaller states like you mentioned. And all of us who care about fairness want their voice to matter as well because they're part of the union too.
Our founding fathers, because they studied history, they knew human nature. I think they got it right. There were things that took us a little bit of time to actually work out, but they got it right on this. They knew that our country was growing, but they knew that there'd be large cities, and they wanted to make sure that our entire country didn't have to have the same values that New York has. And nothing against New York, because I love New York, especially the Yankees. But some of the values that they have in New York, they're different than the middle of the country. They're different than the Farm Belt. They're different than the Rust Belt. And those states, if that's what they want, that's why we have separation of power. So states actually control their own destiny. If you don't like New York, you can move to another state that's more closely aligned to your values. If we took away the Electoral College, well, you know what? I'm not sure what would happen, but I know it wouldn't be good.
Well, I think that's right. It would certainly change the nature of our constitutional republic, and it would dramatically reframe everything. Now, one of the things people might ask when you talk about preserving the Electoral College, they might ask, well, it's in the Constitution, but isn't there a way to change the Constitution?
Sure there is. If we have a majority of the states get together with the Convention of the States and agree that we should change it, that's how you can do it. That's the way it should be done. If the majority of the states wants to do it, that's how you do it. You don't try to put pressure on other individual legislators to come up with some cockamamie reason that you think it's important. I mean, Before we go and change the Electoral College, I wish we would have a convention of the states and require Congress to have a balanced budget so we didn't have $23 trillion in debt that's going to bankrupt our country.
Well, I think a lot of people are concerned about that, and rightfully so. I also don't think too many people realize that this push for a national popular vote is not an attempt to amend the United States Constitution. It's an attempt to do that legislatively. And while they have this strategy, it looks like to me that is full of potential for mischief and legal challenges and last minute changes. Whereas the Constitution is established, everybody knows going in, here's how the election is going to be conducted, here's how we're going to determine the winner. Have you looked at any of the possible mischief that might go on with that?
Well, coming from Florida, and no disrespect to our friends on the East Coast over there, but we see mischief in the Florida elections. Just recently, in the 2018 election, we saw early on the night our Ag Commission race between Matt Caldwell and Nikki Fried. Matt Caldwell had the lead, and 2 hours later, he lost. So there's mischief. We see people in the supervisor of the election that somehow can't handle ballots properly. They don't follow the rules, and nothing happens. Nothing happens. So if we did this for the presidential election, and we know what's at stake in the presidential election, I think that I think it would be the end of the republic as we know it.
Well, that's a pretty strong statement to say that it would be the end of the republic, but I guess there's good reason to think that because we're a constitutional republic for a reason, and we're not a direct democracy for a reason. And I think we should very carefully think through that stuff before we make a big change like this national popular vote idea. It certainly would change the balance of power, and it would change people's confidence in elections. They wouldn't quite know how they fit in. And one of the things I noticed in your resolution is that you highlighted that part of the benefit of passing this resolution is that it would give Florida citizens, Florida voters, confidence that they would know their legislators would honor their oath of office and their vote would count in the way it was intended to. That's a pretty strong statement.
Even back to my Campus Free Speech Act a couple of years ago, when I swear and I raise my right hand to uphold the Constitution, I mean it. And I guess these individuals that are pushing for it, their word means nothing. It just means nothing, because how can you swear to something to uphold and then, no, but we want to change it. We want to change it. Well, then you shouldn't have been sworn into office. On the side note, the Florida Constitution, I do have issues with it because the Florida Constitution is unfortunately for sale by special interest. And I know I've sworn to uphold it. It does give me heartburn when I see 11, issues on a ballot that passed that really should have been done legislative wise and not through special interest from other states for their own needs and own goods. But we're working on curtailing not citizen initiatives, but making sure that it's an honest process also.
Well, I think you raise a good point that you can defend a constitution and support it while trying to amend it if you do it the way the Constitution allows. If you take the amendment process seriously and approach it that way, then that's not undermining things. The national vote is trying to undermine the Constitution and doing it legislatively instead of by the amendment process. That ought to concern all of us because we don't want to undermine our Constitution. We want to support it. And if we need to amend it, do it the right way. And I think that's true in Florida as well. It sounds like that's what you're saying.
Well, if you look at the left, and I'm sorry to call them the left because I don't know what else to call them. If you see what they're doing to our president right now with this witch hunt impeachment process, and which started the day after he got elected, and it continues. The abuse of power that's happening in Washington, the abuse of power of these special interest groups that are only self-serving. They are not trying to protect one individual that lives in the United States. They are self-serving. They're power hungry, and we have to stand up and fight. And the first thing we should always fight for is the United States Constitution, because that's what's created the nation that, to me, is, after 243 years, we're the greatest nation in the world. We're the freest nation in the world. We're the most wealthy nation in the world. We've help eradicate hunger in nations that have not been able to do it themselves. We are still the beacon on the hill, but slowly the left are trying to take one brick out of that at a time, and it's a dangerous place for us all.
Well, it's definitely a time to be vigilant and to preserve what we've been given. And I'm not sure people realize that our nation has the oldest written constitution in history. So it's served us well for a long time. And I think we need to focus on the principles of that Constitution and not let them slip away. That's what helped make us great and will keep us the nation that we've become.
There's "In God We Trust" is in there for a reason, because our country was built on Judeo-Christian values. And luckily we had our founding fathers. They saw the collapse of other nations around the world. They know the history of what can happen because of human nature. It's human nature, envy, jealousy, and the search of power is kind of human nature. And we need these guardrails to let people understand that most of the powers that are in the Constitution, they were God-given, and we're just trying to protect them. We're trying to protect those God-given principles that we all have from human nature and individuals just seeking power for their own good. And I think it's done a great job so far, but we are being tested. And unfortunately, I think some of the young people in America, they don't understand history. When they listen to people like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, that basically wants to strip away people's individual rights of property, to take it away and give it to somebody else because they think government knows best. It's a scary time.
It is. And it's a good warning that you provided us with this resolution that we need to think carefully and seriously about the things that we've been given and not let them slip away. We need to preserve what we've been given because it has really helped us have liberty and enjoy the kind of life we've had. It kind of sounds like we've been giving people a civics lesson, and maybe you could tell people how to find a copy of your resolution.
If they go to the FloridaHouseOfRepresentatives.com, you could look up every bill that's been filed by every representative, and you can get a copy there. And that's really the best way. And you know what? Citizens should be involved. So many people, whether it's local government, state government, or federal government, they get their information from the news. And the news, unfortunately, has become more of a entertainment process, a bully pulpit. They can slant the news, even if you're getting your news from Twitter or Facebook or whatever social media source. You actually have to go dig down. You have to kind of go actually read the language of a bill, maybe study the history of the Constitution. We've seen some of these really, truly entertaining shows when the reporter will go out to one of our, most prestigious universities and ask people about the Constitution. And unfortunately, too few of them don't know Karl Marx, and they definitely don't know who Joseph Stalin was. And the policies that we're seeing are right out of Karl Marx's book that's coming from the left. We just better be careful.
Absolutely. We need to know our rights and freedoms. And I think you're right to mention that people should go to the House website, because every bill that comes before the House is there and people can read it for themselves. And it's amazing how many times when you read something for yourself, you find out that it's very different than the way the news reported it. And that's important. And I think maybe we should put you on the spot. As far as I can tell, you've always been open to hearing from people and to answering their questions as well. Sometimes people think that members of the Florida House don't want to hear from them, but my sense is you're happy to talk to people. Is that right?
I actually truly have an open door policy. If I'm deciding to bring a bill forward, I want to hear from both sides. We are part-time legislators, but somehow we're supposed to be an expert on the 2,000 to 3,000 bills that may come through the Florida House every year. And, first of all, I think that not passing out of the 3,000 will probably pass about 200, and I think that's good. I don't think new laws are always necessary, but I think protecting some that are there for a reason is important. But you need to hear from both sides. You need to have an open door, transparent policy, unlike what's happening with the president and this whole impeachment witch hunt, which has been not transparent and not honest. You need to be, if you want to be an effective legislator and truly do what's right for all Floridians, you have to have an open door. And, I have folks, whether I'm here in Collier County or up in Tallahassee, that come see me. We don't always agree, but we have good, honest conversations.
Well, that's something that everybody should appreciate, because it is important for us to speak up and let representatives like you know what we think and to ask the right questions. And I've sometimes say to people, and I don't know if you've ever had this opportunity, that for sure nobody will listen if you don't speak up. So you ought to speak up and encourage them to listen. And my sense is that a lot of people are like you, and you are especially that way, open to people's ideas and suggestions. And we should take courage and speak up and let you know how we think and get your feedback and input on things. So it's good to hear you say that.
Well, I appreciate what you do and your listeners out there do. And I wish more folks would actually be more engaged in local politics too. Local politics affect individuals at a much faster rate. Whether it's them raising taxes or trying to take away your individual rights because they don't like that you have purple flowers in your front yard. You need to be engaged in local politics, county commissioners, school boards, city councils. You need to go there and listen to them, because if not, they're going to change something that you may get upset with in the future, but you did have an opportunity to go talk to them.
Yeah, that's so important. And we agree. We always encourage people to speak up and be involved in those kind of things. As long as we're talking about the legislative kinds of things, a lot of people aren't aware that much of the legislature's work has begun with committee weeks and all of that. Maybe you could give us a little preview of what you expect when the session starts at the first of the next year.
My particular silo is I'm the chairperson of Civil Justice and the vice chair of Judiciary. And so anything involving civil litigation goes through my silo. Florida is ranked 46 in the nation when it comes to the threat of lawsuits. And 46 is not good out of 50. We seem to have unbalanced the scales where the trial attorney are always looking for a way to sue somebody, and many times unjustly. And last year we were able to do some reform, what's called AOB abuse, assignment of benefits, where individuals would actually assign their benefits of their homeowners insurance to a third party. And the presentation from the third party was, sign this, we'll take care of everything. And the individuals thought that meant their home getting fixed. They didn't think it meant their home may not get fixed, but there's going to be a lawsuit involved and you can no longer be involved as the homeowner. So we fixed that cure. There's some other things out there that we're looking at carefully. Florida has some of the highest auto insurance in the nation. We have some of the highest property and casualty rates in the nation. And in my opinion, it's because the scales of justice are leaning a little bit to the trial bar, and we're going to try to correct that.
Well, we appreciate you paying attention to some of those issues. Those issues really do matter to all of us in Florida. Sometimes people think that what the legislature does doesn't affect them, but in some of these situations, like you've mentioned, they have real consequences for all of us, and we need to pay attention and be involved in that. So we appreciate you giving us a little heads up on that, and a little bit of a civics lesson on the House resolution relative to the Electoral College. I hope some of our listeners will take that and listen to that. Maybe they could take the resolution to school for their civics class and have a conversation about it. Maybe they could listen to this podcast and hear your reasons behind it, some of your thoughts on that. And maybe it'll help all of us engage in the process a little bit more and let our voice be heard. So I want to thank you again for taking time to talk with us. It's been very helpful. And we wish you the best in the legislative session. We know it's a grind. It's a lot of work. But we appreciate people willing to do it and to put the right kind of values forward.
Thank you, Pastor Rick, for your time, and I appreciate you reaching out to me. And to your listeners, I hope you all have a blessed day, and God bless America.
Indeed. Thanks so much. And to all of our listeners, we appreciate you spending some time with us. Always know we're here to help you out if we can help you in any way. If you want to reach out to us at info@goflca.com, we'll be happy to respond to your concerns or your ideas. I talked to someone just this week trying to help them with a school-related problem. We'll be glad to help you if we can, so don't hesitate to reach out. In the meantime, you have a great week with your students and enjoy the civics lesson. Thanks to Representative Bob Rommel for his help and for your willingness to listen. We'll be back soon with some more help for education and solutions that matter to help students have the best education possible in Florida.
Subscribe to the podcast today on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Thanks for listening to the Florida Citizens Alliance podcast.